Alan Wake 2 is a really interesting game. From the subtle undertones of its brilliant story to its cryptic New Game Plus ending, there's a lot to dissect here. Are Alan and Zane the same person? What is the meaning of the ending and where could a possible sequel go? At some point in the game, Mr. Door mentions how there are multiple entities helping Alan, including himself. So who are those entities and who is Mr. Door? The way the narrative is structured leaves a lot of room for interpretation, and that's part of the magic. But we can make some educated deductions to get close to the truth. The symbol of Ouroboros, a snake or a dragon that bites his own tail, symbolizes the union of the opposites, a cycle of transformation, death, rebirth, and evolution. Alan's journey is moved by a very real enemy and an imaginary one. He thinks that Scratch is terrorizing Alice, so he keeps checking in on her and trying to stop Scratch from editing his book. But Scratch isn't really editing the book. He already did, with the help of Thomas Zane and his feature film. Wake's the one editing it. To advance in the dark place, Alan takes the role of Alex Casey. Casey is one of the most interesting characters in the game, a direct homage to Max Payne, an iconic character from Remedy. Alex Casey is a brooding and introspective detective with a dark perspective on life, both sharing the likeness of Sam Lake, writer and creative director of the game. Casey is Saga's partner. During her part of the game, we find out that he had a case in New York regarding a murder cult that worshipped Alan Wake. We get to see two Alex Caseys in the dark place. One, physically manifested by Alan's writing, we'll call him Book Casey, and another, seen through Alan's visions. Book Casey dies so that Alan can take his place in the story. A parallel to Alan killing his most popular book character so he could close that chapter of his life and write something less commercial, something that could highlight his writing, only to have the writer's block that took him to Bright Falls. That's also alluded by Zane's film, in which we see Alex Casey being killed in a ritualistic sacrifice so that Alan Wake can be reborn, emerging from the well. Alan is a para-utilitarian. The visions he gets throughout the game and has seen during his whole life were not mere inspirations as he thought, but also windows to other dimensions or even his own. His writing, a mixture of his observations into the life of the real Alex Casey in this and other dimensions, and fiction. Through Alan's eyes, we get to see what happened in New York with the real Casey, intertwined with Alan's creative additions and the thoughts of Casey from this and other realities. Much like Alan in the first game, finding out that Thomas wrote the clicker into his childhood, the real Casey has an internal conflict between what's real and what's been written into existence, his whole life having eerie similarities to Wake's writing. Alan believes that he's in a loop, constantly reenacting moments trying to break the cycle. The shadows we fight throughout the game are versions of Alan, maybe remnants from the past loops or just manifestations of his toxic emotions. They whisper words like, "I'll write you out of my story," "I'm drowning," referencing his ego because it's his story, and the effect of the dark place that drives Alan to drown in a lake's spiral of madness. The veil between the dark place and reality gets thinner at moments, described by Alice as waves hitting the shore. At times, when Alan looks for Alice and Scratch in their apartment, the waves hit. He's projected into reality filtered by the veil of the dark place as a haunting for Alice, only showing the bad emotions the dark place takes advantage of, like his anger. From all of the cycles, resets, and repetitions, Alan was projected almost on a daily basis for Alice, driving her to throw herself off a cliff. Believing that Scratch is changing the script and shaken by Alice's fate, Alan storms in and shoots him in the head. But it wasn't really Scratch, but himself in a previous cycle trying to fix the script. All of the cycles, the hunt for himself, the biting of his own tail, were mere dark designs to get him to believe that he drove Alice to death, that He has no more reasons to resist, a trap to make him give in to every dark emotion. This is the ritual to lead you on. Death, resurrection, transformation. Your friends will meet him when you are gone. If Wake was filling the role of Casey in the story, that's also true for Zane's feature film. If Alan was Casey, being somehow sacrificed to bring forth the Rider, Scratch was filling the role of the Rider, returning.
En kierrä kehää. Tämä on spiraali.
The game tricks us into thinking that Alan and Saga's stories are happening at different times because we keep seeing Alan in the overlaps after we see him getting out of the lake. When Saga realizes that the Alan she met was actually Scratch, she decides to rescue Alan from the dark place, leading us to believe that their stories are actually happening at the same time, but that's also not true. By the end of the game, it's revealed that the dark place doesn't work in a loop, but a spiral. The chapter songs in the game are contextual and serve to give us insight into the story, how the world works, and the perspective of the characters. Whilst most of Saga's chapter songs are different from one another, Alan's songs seem to always be the same in the dark place, with small variations alluding to how the dark place works. In a spiral, it almost looks like it's going nowhere, circling back, repeating, but it actually ends up moving forward through similar paths. The music keeps changing, little by little. When Saga tries to bring Alan back, she believes that he's going to be brought to the present or a near future, but it doesn't work the way she expects because Alan is already there, possessed by Scratch, and because time works differently in the dark place. If in the real world time is a line and the dark place is a spiral, their intersections would make time overall non-linear. A later point to the dark ocean summoning of Alan Wake in the dark place would be a previous point in the timeline of Saga. Another example of this is when Saga is thrown in the lake, getting stuck in the dark place and, not long after, meeting with Thor and Odin. Thor and Odin jumped after her, but were thrown in an earlier moment of the spiral, and that's why we see them playing in Mr. Door's show during Alan's segments. Mr. Door is an interesting character. He's the one who teleported Sheriff Breaker to the dark place before he was able to give Saga the manuscript pages. Those pages told us how Mr. Door and all the doors were able to jump through dimensions. He mentions that Alan has drawn someone he cares about into danger and tells him that there were multiple entities helping him. Ati, a name that translates to water god, always seems to be present in key moments everywhere, dark place or reality, with his cryptic messages, always helping the player somehow, being Saga or Alan alongside his trusty janitor's bucket filled with water. He instructs us on how to get out of the dark place by not getting overwhelmed by our mistakes and problems and overcoming them, and he tells us how water is the memory of the world, how it always finds its way, the threshold through realities. It's not by accident that we use the water next to Ati's bucket as a path to change which character we are following, going from one dimension to another. He is actively helping us to overcome the dark place, providing guidance and passageway. I also believe that we, as players, have a role as one of the entities helping them. We guide Alan and Saga through these challenges. Both of them stay exactly where they are when we interact with the bucket. So maybe the player is the one who can actually use Ati's gateways to jump through dimensions. The other entities might be a little more obvious, like the FBC and Thor and Odin Anderson, who are also para-utilitarians. Before it was stopped by Alan Wake in 2010, the Andersons were the ones who held the darkness at bay, Odin losing an eye in the process. The music Thor made for Saga's mom tells us how he never got along with Saga's father, and how he drove him away, causing Saga's mom to never talk to him again. The fact that we don't know who or where Saga's father is That in the dark place, Odin says to Saga that they made peace with Mr. Door, with remarks from Thor that he will never truly forgive him. That Mr. Door kept the Breaker from giving Saga the pages that would involve her, and states that Alan has involved someone important for him into the story, lead me to believe that Mr. Door is Saga's father. Saga is trapped inside her own mind. As alluded by Ati, she has to overcome her dark emotions so she can escape the dark place, otherwise she is consumed by darkness. Saga feels like she's a bad partner, a bad FBI agent, and a bad mother. Her guilt for the supposed death of her daughter, a parallel to the feeling of neglect from spending long spans of time away from her. After overcoming these feelings, she is able to leave the dark place through a fountain of water. Some of the names of the characters are tied to their role in the story. Ati, god of water. Our guide, always leaving his puddles of water behind to help us. Mr. Door, who can open doors to other realities. Sheriff Breaker, who serves as a break room for Alan amidst all the chaos. A room where he can refill his ammo and flashlight battery. A breaker to add light in the dark place. Thor and Odin and their relation to Norse mythology. Odin, who seems wise and lost his eye. And Thor, who has an explosive personality and plays the electric guitar. Saga, the seer who represents the continuation of Alan Wake's story. Alice, who is the first to be trapped in a land far beyond her own. Alan Wake, who is trapped in a city of dreams. And Mr. Scratch. After finally getting out of the dark place as himself after 13 years, Alan has to jump back in because of Scratch, who managed to get the clicker and change Bright Falls into his own egotistic realm revolving around Alan's and his book launch. Scratch is the amalgamation of the worst parts of Alan. His name, Scratch, represents his self-doubts and insecurities as a writer, the constant writes and rewrites of the script. His psychotic personality, a reflection of the perceived fame of the writer as a party animal with an explosive personality, mixed with the urban legend surrounding his mysterious disappearance. Stories that he was a maniac and a murderer. The Bright Falls created by Scratch revolves around the release of their book, alluding to Alan's pride in his own writing and the need to be appraised for it. Scratch is also a pseudonym for the devil, alluding to Alan having somewhat of a god complex. His pride and his ego derived from his writing that creates and manipulates. Scratch, the ruler of a dark and twisted realm who fights his creator. As the amalgamation of every bad part of Alan, Scratch is, for all intents and purposes, a demon. Alan's pride makes it so he bears the burden alone. It's his fault if he fails, hence the constant self-doubts and rewrites of the script. By allowing Saga to write the ending alongside him, Alan is making genuine strides to getting out of the dark place by overcoming his pride and allowing someone else to have a say. Alan ends up sacrificing himself with a light bullet in his head, his last moments spent thinking if this would change anything, if it would break the loop, finally releasing everyone else, or if it would only reset it, sending him to the beginning with no recollection of what happened. By remembering everything that happened when he woke up, Alan realizes that something had changed. It was the beginning, but it was not the same because he remembered. That's what the phrase, "it's not a loop, it's a spiral," means. The lines in a spiral are closer together, meaning that temporal overlaps are more likely. Just like Ouroboros, it seems like a loop, but it moves forward instead of repeating itself. It represents something else entirely. It's also revealed that Alan didn't jump off a cliff. She dove into the lake to help Alan. Also alluded by the chapter songs like Follow You Into the Dark, that seems to have each verse of the song from one of the characters' perspectives, and describes how each of them have jumped into darkness for their loved ones. Alice is behind the scenes helping Alan. His words don't seem to affect her. She, as an outside observer, understands the dark place and is manipulating the cycles to help him escape by using art. Art is what has effect in the dark place, a metaphor to how art has the power to change, influence, and affect us. Alan uses his writing, the old gods of Asgard use their songs, Thomas Zane uses his films, and Alice uses her photographs. That's how the heroes are able to get the light bullet and the clicker, by Alice's art. Darkness in the game represents madness, confusion, and ignorance. Light would represent knowledge and sanity. The pictures that capture the truth of the moment, an art form that literally emits light. By taking a picture of Alan with the light bullet in his head, she's able to assist him one more time by guiding him on going through the cycle again, bending the road to go forward, and create a story about a version of him that would rise as a higher entity. The light bullet in his head, the opening of the third eye that symbolizes knowledge, a higher state of consciousness, and enlightenment. By allowing collaboration instead of embracing his pride on his writing, Alan is able to reach a higher state of mind. Scratch fills the role of Casey in the movie, so that the writer, Alan, can return. Ouroboros might look like it symbolizes a loop, but its actual meaning is that of a spiral, a cycle of evolution, the union of the opposites, Alan and Scratch, light and darkness, sanity and madness, knowledge and ignorance, death, rebirth, transformation. Saga's call to her daughter finally connects, proving that the ending they wrote finally worked. With the help of Alice, they have finally reached the end of the spiral. Alan can see Alice and he states that he's now the master of many worlds. If Saga is Dora's daughter, she's able to open the gate to any dimension, indicating that they might still work together. Him with otherworldly knowledge and her with the ability to hop between them. There are mentions from Barry, Alan's agent, about someone wanting to make a video game from the Casey books, a direct reference to Max Payne, who the character of Casey is based upon. Casey is played by Sam Lake, who actually shows up in the game as a version of himself, an actor who is playing the role of Alex Casey in the movie adaptation of Alan's books. He's even asked to make the face, which is the expression Sam makes in real life for Max Payne, has been requested by fans to make for years and has been carried out for Casey. We even get a scene where Alan has to kill Sam in order to progress in the dark place, mirroring the movie made by Tom and representing the killing of Alan's book character physically manifested. Sam, who, much like Alan, is the creator who introduced himself into his work, being killed by its creation, a version of himself in the dark place with the same name, alluding to connections between their reality and ours. There are also mentions from the game universe that allow us to make connections to our own world, like mentions of famous writers such as Hemingway, leading us to believe that maybe the darkness has been looking for writers to manipulate for centuries in the efforts of expanding the dark place. After the ending of the game, some questions still remain, like what happened to Alice? Alan seems to be able to sense her now. Is that only a result of his new higher state of consciousness, or is it that somehow she sacrificed herself, condensing the remnants of her soul into a light projectile, one that would keep the darkness at bay? Alice and Alan together as one, forever. Maybe she's somewhere in the dark place, and Alan can now help her to get out. Why Alan and Thomas Zane look alike, and why there seems to be inconsistencies in the backstory of Zane. Is he a poet or a movie maker? Are they the same person, or maybe iterations of the same person written to be? Everyone who is special and isn't affected by the story, like the Andersons and Nati, calls Alan by the name of Tom, and when asked about it, Ati replies, "A man's a man, and a man with a tool makes two," which leads me to believe that somehow Alan is an extension of Tom. Scratch has to leave Casey's body once it's revealed that Casey isn't a creation of Alan. Is Scratch able to possess Alan because they were somehow the same before, or because Thomas Zane created Alan? One of Tom's movies is also titled Tom the Poet, leading me to believe, and he confirms it in Control, that Tom from the first game, who was a poet and a diver, was just a part. If that means that he is the same person in two different roles, or that movie maker Tom created another person, it doesn't really matter when you take into account the nature of the Dark Place, that allow multiple versions of the same person to coexist because of the time anomaly created by it. Tom, the movie maker, that created a version of himself, created Alan and created Scratch in his image. Even if Scratch was evil, he didn't see a problem cooperating with him because, just like Alan, he's just a creation, a means to an end of leaving the Dark Place. Maybe both Toms are multiple versions of Alan during his spiraling of madness in the Dark Place, two sides of the same coin, Zane's madness to Alan's sanity. Zane being a version of Alan who has gone mad, or Alan a version of Zane who has come to his senses, creating and destroying. Their backstories erased, then created and made real by the story. The writing that can change reality and conflict with the memory of the writer. It doesn't really matter which is true, Zane or Alan. They are in-game personifications of the game's writers. The writing that changes reality retrospectively. What is written is our minds battling the idea because our memory works linearly, but narratives don't. Alan can use the power of the game's writers to change reality to the best outcome possible, as long as it stays in theme with the genre, and as long as it's enjoyable to us following him. It can't just be an unrealistic happy ending, because the readers, or us, the players, wouldn't accept that. The story has to be good to defeat the darkness, and Alan Wake 2's story manages that. The game's narrative is brilliant, and a lot is left for interpretation. So maybe you have a different take or something else I didn't catch from the game, so feel free to comment down below. Subscribe if you enjoy these kinds of videos, and thank you.